You know, when you think about the history of yoga, some names just pop up, right? They're legendary. But what happens when the legend is pretty much all we've got? Today, we're going to try and pull back the curtain on one of yoga's most important and honestly, most mysterious figures, Matsyendranath, the guy credited with founding Hatha Yoga.
So who was this guy really? I mean, the stories, they paint this picture of a godlike figure. But when you look for historical records, it's almost crickets. So what are we dealing with here? A real flesh and blood yogi? A deity? Or just a powerful myth? That's what we're going to dig into. Let's see if we can separate the legend from the actual man.
Okay, so the very first thing you got to get your head around is this huge gap between the myth and the man. It's like two different stories. On one hand, you have these wild, incredible legends. I'm talking swallowed by a fish, taught yoga by a god, worshipped as a deity himself. And then, on the other hand, what little historical evidence we have points to a real radical thinker, a yogi who lived somewhere between the 8th and 10th centuries and literally started a whole new spiritual lineage.
So, to really get a handle on the legend, we've got to start with his most famous story. I mean, this is the tale that gives him his name, Matsyendranath, which literally means Lord of the Fish. So the story goes like this. As a boy, for whatever reason, he was seen as unlucky. So unlucky, in fact, that he was thrown into the ocean. And bam, a giant fish comes along and swallows him whole.
But this is where things get really interesting. This isn't a tragedy, it's a transformation. He's trapped inside this fish for years, drifting down to the very bottom of the ocean. And it's down there, in the dark, that he overhears a conversation, a secret conversation, between the ultimate yogi, the god Shiva, and his partner, the goddess Parvati.
And what were they talking about? Only the deepest, most secret teachings of yoga. You know, knowledge so sacred it was meant only for the goddess to hear. But Matsyendranath, he's there, listening. He soaks it all in, and when he finally emerges from that fish, he's a fully enlightened master.
Now, obviously, this story probably isn't meant to be taken as literal history, right? It's symbolic. The fish, think of it like a kind of transformation chamber. The whole legend is a perfect illustration of a core tantric idea, that the really deep knowledge isn't something you find in a book. It's revealed to you, just some kind of extraordinary, almost secret experience.
Okay, so if the fish story is a metaphor, what does actual history tell us about the man? Well, once you start peeling back those layers of myth, a really fascinating historical figure starts to emerge.
Most scholars think Matsyendranath lives somewhere between the 8th and 10th centuries. And you have to understand, this was a really vibrant time in India. It was like this spiritual melting pot where all these different ideas were bumping up against each other. You had traditions like Shaiva Tantra, which is all about divine energy, mixing with early yogic practices, and he was right in the thick of this creative explosion.
And to make things even more mysterious, we're not even 100% sure where he came from. If you go to Nepal, he's known as Matsyendranath. He's this beloved deity from the Kathmandu Valley, the one who brings the rain. But then in the Indian Natha tradition, they trace his roots to eastern India, or Assam, which was a real hotspot for tantric stuff back then.
And his education? Yeah, it wasn't what you'd think. No formal schools or anything like that. His knowledge came from what's called direct transmission, inside these kind of secretive spiritual circles. He learned by doing, through practice, through ritual, and through initiation from a master. It was a path all about direct experience, not just reading old orthodox texts.
So with this kind of background, it's no surprise that he came up with a truly radical vision for yoga. Seriously, it was something that would change the spiritual landscape of India forever. And this right here, this is the heart of his radical idea. See, at the time, a lot of spiritual paths saw the body as a problem, like a prison for the soul that you had to suppress or punish. But Matsyendranath, he completely flipped the script. He taught that the body isn't an obstacle, it's the vehicle for liberation. The whole point wasn't to deny it, but to master it.
And that philosophy became the foundation for his biggest legacy, the Natha community. This was a truly revolutionary movement. It was all about the physical practices of Hatha Yoga, the postures and breathing that are so familiar to us today. It was built on that direct guru-to-student relationship. And maybe most importantly, it offered a path to liberation that was open to anyone, no matter what their caste was. That was a huge deal.
So his path to liberation wasn't just some abstract idea. It was a clear, practical system. Here's how it works. First, you discipline the physical body. That gets you ready for step 2, awakening the kundalini, this incredibly powerful sleeping energy that's said to rest at the base of your spine. From there, the goal is to guide that energy up through these subtle energy channels called nadis. Doing that purifies your whole system and ultimately leads to liberation, and some texts even say to physical immortality.
And it was this powerful vision that made sure his influence didn't just die with him. Nope. They created a legacy that is very much alive today.
A huge reason for that lasting legacy, by the way, comes down to his most important student, Gorakhnath. It was Gorakhnath who took his master's core teachings, organized them into a system, and then spread them far and wide. He's really the one who made the Natha tradition a major spiritual force all across South Asia.
So we come back to our original question. Who was the real Matsyendranath? Well, the answer isn't simple. He was a master yogi. He was the founder of a whole new tradition. He was seen as a living god in Nepal, and he was the revered guru to his successor. He wasn't just one of these things, he was all of them. His identity really changes depending on who you ask and where you are.
And this dual identity might be the most fascinating part of his whole story. In India, he's remembered as a human teacher, a historical guru, the Adi Guru, or first teacher of the Hatha Yogis. But then you just hop over the border into Nepal, and he's worshipped as a literal god, a divine protector who brings rain and prosperity.
When you boil it all down, the historical Matsyendranath was a master synthesizer. He was brilliant at weaving together these different threads, taking the deep, esoteric rituals of Tantra and blending them with the disciplined, body-centered practices of yoga. And by doing that, he didn't just create a new path, he fundamentally reshaped Indian spirituality.
Which leaves us with one last big question. For a figure like Matsyendranath, what does a true biography even mean? Is it the handful of historical facts we can piece together? Or is it the living, breathing legacy? The millions of people who, for over 1,000 years, have stepped onto a yoga mat and, maybe without even knowing it, tapped into his radical vision, this idea of transforming the body to free the mind. Maybe his real story isn't something written down in the past. Maybe it's still being practiced, right now, today.